Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the illustrious, the infamous Katie Penke, who is a small farm planner with Whatcom Conservation District. She's been with us about a year and a half now, and is also the owner of Alluvial Farms, which is a pastured pork organization here in Whatcom County. So she's a farmer herself and has been working with farmers like you for the last year and a half, really improving their practices and providing what the Conservation District can offer. So she'll talk a little bit about the services we provide, and she's promising to teach you about stress-free farming. And that may have been my fault because I titled it that. So no pressure on Katie. I don't know if there's any farmer that would say that they're stress-free, but we are going to do our best today. So without further ado, Katie Penke.
Do I get the traveling mic?
Oh, no.
Or can I come out?
You're up. Get on the stage. But you can walk.
Hello, thank you so much for coming to this talk today. I'm so excited to meet you all. My name is Katie Pencke, as Annika mentioned, and I am a small farm planner at the Whatcom Conservation District. So anyone who's managing livestock who is not a dairy is a client of mine, or I would love to work with you to help you achieve your goals. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that we work. So one of the things that we like to see ourselves as is sort of a connector. So this event here today is part of our vision to help the rural landowner to connect with all the resources in the community. In many ways, anyone managing a rural piece of land, you are your own public works district. You're managing your water, you're managing your waste, you're managing a lot of elements that in a city is managed by the public works. So how, as landowners, can we learn about all these systems and manage them? And then in addition, how can we connect with our neighbors? So we like to see ourselves as a place where people can kind of come, gather resources, and meet their neighbors. So for example, the Small Farm Expo, and then on the left, every year we have a series during the winter time as well of small farm speaker series, and the arrows are letting you know that there's actually one left to come regarding growing grass. So we're going to be talking about a pasture calendar or a grass production calendar for the west side of the Cascades, and that is middle of the day, third Thursday in March, and there's more information about that at our booth in the front. New this year, another way that we work with folks, so we are incentive-based, confidential, and non-regulatory. So we do have grants for improvements on the farm, and I'll be talking more about that. But a new this year partnership with the Northwest Horse Source magazine, a design competition for somebody interested in making some changes on the site to improve water quality and improve your animal health and your chore efficiency. So if anyone in the audience is managing horses and is interested in this, please let me know, or you can talk with the Northwest Horse Source. So finally, what is a farm plan? So as Annika mentioned, I'm also farming in the county. My family owns a pastured pork business. So when I approach my role as a farm planner, I like to kind of put myself in your shoes and think, what would be helpful to me? How can I bring value to you as a landowner, as a farmer? What I'm sent out with is a host of what we call best management practices, which you can see on the slide to my right. And so all of these, I like to call them cookie cutter solutions. They're very the same across the board. We use the term heavy use area for a place where animals are kept in the winter. We love to talk about gutters and roof water management. We like to know where's your drinking water well and where is that in relation to manure and animals. And we have best management practices that are kind of like the cookie cutter solution, but then where your part comes in is you know what time you have available, you know what resources you have available, what equipment you're working with, and then each of your sites is very unique, and each of you probably know your site in and out much better than I do. So it's a collaborative process of me coming to the table with these best management practices, and then you meeting me halfway and us figuring out together how are we going to put these practices on the ground at your site. So I couldn't help but insert a picture of pigs into the slideshow. They're just so cute. They love to be outside. That's them on pasture there. And just an example, sort of, maybe your question might be, well, what is this farm planning process? How does it work? First of all, I'd love to let you know that it is free. You do not need to pay for this. Conservation districts were established in the 40s during the Dust Bowl as a way to provide a non-regulatory, incentive-based free service. So every county in the nation pretty much has one. And we all work in roughly the same way. The best management practices are different county by county depending on what we're working with. The Puget Sound region, all the districts who are kind of around the Puget Sound, we all share practices. We're all mostly dealing with wet winters and how do we avoid the mud that comes along with wet winters. But the process basically is, if you're interested in finding out if this is a good service for you, we come out for an initial site visit where we basically walk the perimeter and try to learn everything we can about what are your goals on this site. We take that information back to the office, put together maps, a compilation of resources, and then come back out and we say, did we get it? Is this more or less what you had in mind? And usually at that point there's some tweaking. We go back, we fix the maps. We're not trying to say this is the plan, period. We're trying to say this is the vision for right now. A farm is an organic place. It's always constantly changing and growing. Every time we accomplish one project on the list, we learn new things about the site. Everything changes around that one project, and then it's moving forward. So it's not meant to be set in stone. It's meant to be a working document, something to help guide you and to prioritize the different projects that might be on the list. So in the back of my mind, when I come to the site, in addition to the best management practices, in our county there is a checklist, 29-question checklist that the county and the Conservation District created together to help to guide us. How does your operation match up with what the county would like to see as far as protecting critical areas like streams, ditches, wetlands, etc. And we have copies of this checklist at our booth near the entrance if you're interested in seeing it. But the rest of the slideshow is kind of going to go piece by piece. The checklist is based on the areas of the farm. So I'm kind of just going to go through the checklist with you so that you know what's going through our minds when we're walking around. So we start with the buildings. And really this very uninspiring photo is actually very exciting to a farm planner because we have some really great gutters and downspouts. One of our favorite things to talk about. How are we managing all the clean water that's going to fall onto the roofs in order to keep it away from areas where animals and manure is situated? And so oftentimes this can get pretty elaborate. It can involve putting the water into an underground outlet and outletting it somewhere else where it's appropriate for all this clean water to go. So fairly basic, but oftentimes one of the first things that we focus on is roof water management and how do we keep that clean water away from animal use areas or manure. The next thing we're looking at, and sometimes this can come as a little bit of a shock to people who might not have managed animals in our climate before, is that in the wintertime, our goal is to keep these animals off your soil. A lot of times, wet soil in our climate, especially if you have a soil that might have a higher clay content, less sand, it becomes very compacted when the animal is on the ground. So we create these areas, we call them a confinement area or a heavy use area. A sacrifice area is another term, a place with an improved footing where the animal can be in the winter without negatively impacting your ability to produce grass, to produce a crop, without negatively impacting your soil. So there's a lot of different footing types depending on the animal that you're raising, and we can help you to size the area depending on your target number of animals and what you're planning. And then we also want to look at the exterior of the area. Is there any surface water that's moving through that might need to be diverted, or how close is this heavy use area to water? What you see in the slide is an example of an improved footing that's often used in the case of a horse or somebody who's caring for horses, where instead of just wood chips on the ground and continuing to layer wood chips, we're actually excavating some of the organic soil, putting down a landscape fabric, fastening it well, and then putting drain rock, and then the footing of your choice, often sand on top of that. So a lot of layers go into that. It's a bit of an investment, but so is keeping a horse. So that animal's going to be with you for many years. So you want to give it a really comfortable place. It's really great for your chore efficiency, and then it also improves the horse's health. It's not out there grazing where parasites can be picked up, etc. So there's a lot of advantages in our climate to these confinement areas. There's things that we can do to give the animal the exercise that it needs and whatnot, and all of that is customized to your site. This one is an aerial photograph, and so I wanted to emphasize all my work with cooperators and all the work that Conservation District does on your site is completely confidential. But now I am showing you this map. So I talked to this client and I said, I would love to share this in a slideshow. Can I please have your permission? And they said, okay. But I always like to take this moment to emphasize that confidentiality is really important to the way that we work. In fact, it's written into the law that created conservation districts. But this is an example of a client who had the sump pump from their basement outletting next to the heavy use area. So all the water from the basement was directly funneled into the place where the animal lived all winter. So we worked together to create a system of underground outlets to keep all that clean water out of the heavy use area. So sometimes even things that are just seem fairly straightforward, if you don't know the right contractor to call, or you don't know if it's okay to outlet the water over there, these type of things is what we're talking through. On the left, you can see a stand of very tall grass, and on the right, shorter. So what I'm trying to show here is that by putting a strip of at least 50 feet of 3-inch or taller grass adjacent to a pasture or adjacent to an area where there is a lot of manure, we can create a filter strip just by allowing the grass to grow taller. Manures are often caught by the grass as the water's passing through. So this concept of a grass filter strip is one that we can use all over the farm, depending on your soil type and your slope, etc., as a way to keep the water that's leaving your property clean. So the final note I would make on the heavy use area is that the other thing we're looking at, are there any drains or pipes in the heavy use area that's going to be taking water that could have manure or nutrients in it off the property? So again, a client who gave me their permission to use this photo in the slideshow, they happened to have purchased a barn that had a French drain installed directly adjacent to the heavy use area, and the French drain outlets into the roadside ditch. So if this person was not managing the heavy use area, there would be a manure-filled water that's going right into the roadside ditch, which, you know, offhand, just by looking at the photo, that could be a problem. But what we can do as the farm planner is I was able to certify that this person was managing the heavy use area to such an extent that they were picking the manure twice a day. And then by having the farm plan, they've sort of shown that they've done their due diligence to know all the details of their system and to know how it needs to be managed in order to be ecologically sound. So that's another role that we can kind of fill, is like an objective third-party certifier of your ecological practices. All of our work, again, is totally voluntary, and the planning is just between the planner and the client, except for a few cases where, for example, currently in Whatcom County, there is often a requirement to file a farm plan with the county if you're getting a permit to build an agricultural building. So that might be a time where the plan is shared with the county, and we'd be happy to talk more with you about what that might look like. None of it is ever recorded on the title, and the plan goes with the owner, and it's not a regulatory plan once it is filed. Moving on to the next section of the farm, you can imagine if you have a place where you're confining animals in the winter, you're going to have a concentration of manure that you need to store until the growing season when you can safely apply it to your field. So another thing we love to talk about is manure storage. So we can help to size a manure storage to your operation and talk with you about composting. How do we get air into that pile? Are we doing an aerated pile with blowers? Are we using tubes? Do you have a tractor and you're going to aerate the pile yourself? And then we'll do some calculations to help balance the amount of manure, the nutrients you're producing, with what your grass needs. We'll look at the placement of the manure storage in relation to surface water and your drinking water well. And then finally, we can talk with you about how to apply the manure. I already talked a little bit about the agronomics of it. We'll look at your soil type and the grass that's being produced there, what you're looking at pulling off of it, and how much nutrient that system needs versus how much nutrient you're producing with your animal numbers, and see if there's a balance there, or if we might need to be exporting nutrients, and then talk about what might be the best time, the most advantageous time of the year to apply. In this county, due to all the heavy rain, it's less than ideal to apply during the winter, and there are certain setbacks from surface water that we have to observe when applying. climb. And there's lots more information about that on our website, or we can customize a plan for you at your sites. Then we go to the pasture and the hayland, and we like to make sure that animals excluded from surface water. So what you see here is a trail that was a preferred trail of animals to cross a surface water stream, and so that landowner created a fencing and a setback from the stream. This is a little bit hard to see potentially, but another example of in the right-hand corner where the animals are pastured right up to the edge of a ditch in the wintertime, which creates a potential pathway for nutrients and pathogens to enter the watershed. And then on the left, you can see a fencing project that's going to be pulling animals back in the wintertime from surface water. So something that we're always looking at. We love to look at how do we grow the most grass. Often our biggest cost as farmers or as livestock managers is bringing in feed. So the more grass and feed that we can grow on site, the less you're going to have to be purchasing. So ideally we're keeping the grass 4 inches or taller. That's the amount of solar panel that a grass plant needs in order to feed its roots and to be regenerating growth. So we'll rotate the animals around the pastures in order to allow the grass the time that it needs to get back to that 4 inches or more. On the right-hand side, you can see a system of paddocks that a cooperator of ours who just stepped into the room has designed, and he's got an alley going down the side, and he moves the beef through those paddocks just a few days at a time to keep the grass healthy and tall. This is not in the checklist, but one of my favorite slides. In our climate, it's really nice practice to try to overseed pastures that have been grazed or that might be compacted in the fall. So just to my left here, we have actually an aerator that 2 clients of mine are using together. So many amazing things about this. One is that the person bought the implement but didn't need it all the time. You just really need an aerator a couple times a year, maybe in the fall. And so they purchased the aerator and then immediately lent it to another client that we were able to introduce them to. So as smaller acreage landowners, we don't always need the implement all the time. You might just need it once or twice. So if anyone is thinking of buying a manure spreader or an aerator or something that's useful for pasture management that you don't want to use all the time, we'd love to talk with you about banking that tool and sharing that more in the community around you. But you can see here a version of an aerator and then manure spreading, overseeding, and harrowing. So it's kind of a way to renovate your pasture every year without needing to do a full pasture renovation and killing all the grass. So it's basically just a compost application. It's a little bit to combat compaction by doing an aerating, and then the overseeding reintroduces favorable pasture grasses that you've chosen every year, because oftentimes your animal's going to overgraze the plants that they like, and the ones that they don't like are going to get to seed and set seed unless we're mowing behind the animal, which is another best practice. But this kind of thinking of like every year in the fall I might do some overseeding, or every other year, that type of thing is what we love to talk about. Oop, wrong direction. I think we're getting close to the end here with pasture and hayland. So we love to talk about nutrient management, but how do we know what's in the soil in order to know what it needs, or if there's anything in excess? So we actually, at this point, the Conservation District has a complimentary service for any livestock manager where we will test your soil. We'll come out and we'll take, as you see all the little X's there, I run back and forth on the field and I take all these samples, maybe 20, a dozen to 20, mix them in a bucket, and we send a composite sample to a lab, and they'll tell us what are your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, how are those things looking, as well as your organic matter and your pH. So we can use that as a baseline for you to know, oh, really what I need is lime. It's not that I need more nitrogen. I just need to get my pH a little bit closer to neutral, etc. So if anyone is interested in this complimentary soil test, please come and talk with us. We also have we use a soil probe to take the test. You can see that there. So we get just like a little core that comes out of it. We've got a real life soil probe over at our table by the front door. Come and check it out. The grass swale in a pasture. So these go dry in the summer, but in the winter they run with water. So this is a farmable area when it's summertime, but depending on where this water is going, we're likely going to want to keep animals out of it in the winter. So this is part of where the customized farm plan comes in. is we'll come and work with you, but it's also a part of the checklist. Are there any grassy swales that you farm, but which run with water and connect to surface water in the wintertime? Those are sensitive areas, and we need to keep the animals off. And in fact, it's a great application of the filter strip concept. So let's get the animals off with enough time for the grass in that swale to get to at least 3 inches, so it can be filtering as the water's passing through. Grass usually stops growing around Halloween, and so if we pull the animals off by October 1st or so, maybe even earlier, then we'll have enough time for the grass to grow. This last slide just shows a few other parts, components of a pasture system that might become a heavy use area, which we might need to either protect or put a filter strip between it. So we've got on the top left-hand corner 2 examples of watering systems. One is a nose pump. If you had been watering your animals in a stream, there is a pump available that you drop the intake into the stream, and the animal, it works really well for cows. The animal comes and pushes a pump and activates it, pushes a little nose lever and activates the pump, and so the water's brought to the animal doesn't need to enter the stream. The same effect happens, the animal's watered. The other one is a tank in between 4 paddocks, so a way to create one watering facility for a rotational system without having to have water in each paddock. And then the other is an example of a lane. That's actually the lane that was in that pasture rotation system that I had a few slides ago. So the concept of the animal needs to go in that lane every day to get to the new paddock. And so that will over time become a heavy use area of its own. So we may need to put down some kind of protective footing. That is the end of my slides. Thank you guys so much for your attention and interest. I would love to hear if there are any questions in the audience regarding farm planning in Whatcom County, any of our free confidential services, and I'm very excited to hopefully visit with some of you on your site soon. And thank you for those of you who've already had us out. It's been great to work with you.